We are following some breaking news in the case of the vascular surgeon accused of killing his ex-wife and her husband in Columbus, Ohio. An Ohio grand jury just indicted Michael McKee on 5 counts, and no longer is he just facing charges of murder. What the new charges tell us about the unanswered questions about what happened inside the home of Monique and Spencer Tepe on December 30th. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Michael McKee is no longer just facing 2 charges of aggravated murder. I want to show you this. This is the 5-count indictment that just dropped out of Franklin County, Ohio. That is where Columbus is. An Ohio grand jury indicted McKee on 5 counts Friday, and he is now facing 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. And we also just learned through this indictment some new information about what McKee allegedly had on him the night that he allegedly committed this terrible, terrible crime. Now, right now, McKee is in the Winnebago County Jail in Illinois. That's where Rockford, Illinois is located, about an hour and a half west of Chicago. He was a surgeon, vascular surgeon at a medical facility in Rockford, Illinois, and he was arrested near his place of employment, according to Columbus police. Right now, McKee is awaiting extradition to Ohio, and that is where he will face the charges in connection to allegedly killing Monique and Spencer Tepe in the early morning hours of December 30th. Now, I want to remind you, because there's been a lot of information that has come in over the past couple of days and some new information that we have uncovered when it comes to who Michael McKee is and how we got to this point. How does someone go from being a vascular surgeon? This is the type of surgeon that works with veins and arteries. You have to be incredibly smart and incredibly skilled to be this type of surgeon. How does somebody go from that to now being a killer, allegedly accused of taking the lives of your ex-wife and her husband with young children in the house? So let's dive into this. McKee, again, this vascular surgeon who worked at this medical center in Rockford, Illinois, up until his arrest. And he was arrested by federal ATF agents last weekend near his place of employment. Allegedly, it was a Chick-fil-A where he was arrested. We are hoping to get more information about what actually happened there during his arrest. And also, we're working to learn more about what work was like for McKee as this vascular surgeon in the months, the weeks, the days leading up to the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe. Now, McKee's connection to the Tepes, as I said, it is through Monique. He was once married to her. Her maiden name is Sabatursky, and Columbus police have yet to say what they believe specifically was the motive for McKee to allegedly carry out these murders. But they did say at a news conference that they consider this a targeted attack, and they say it was an act of domestic violence. Now, McKee and Monique divorced in 2017, so this was roughly a decade ago that they, it appears, went their separate ways. They were only married for 2 years. The divorce, it seemed amicable when you looked at the court documents, but obviously there's a lot more to the story. After the two were married in 2015, and they moved to Virginia, where McKee continues his training to become a vascular surgeon with a residency in Roanoke. The couple actually bought a home. They owned a home in Roanoke as he continued this residency. The marriage, though, for as promising as McKee's medical career appeared to be headed, the marriage was falling apart, and it fell apart fast. On May 2nd, 2017, Monique Tepe, then Sabatursky, files for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. The complaint for that divorce reads that at the time she filed, she had been living in Ohio for more than 6 months. And McKee, he was still in Virginia, continuing his surgical residency. And the complaint goes on to say that the couple didn't have kids. She wasn't pregnant at the time that she filed for divorce. And the reason she was filing, quote, plaintiff states that the parties are incompatible. Now, there's a lot of rumors out there about what this marriage was like. Earlier this week, Anjanette Levy of Law&Crime spoke with Rob Misla, who is Spencer Tepe's brother-in-law, and he talked about some of the verbal abuse that he believes was part of this marriage that Monique had to her ex-husband, McKee. Today, we did learn some clarification, though, on the divorce that I do want to talk about, because when we looked up the couple's divorce case at the very beginning of this, we saw that there was an entry from June of last year, and it showed that there was a hearing scheduled for September 2025 in this case that was done in 2017. USA Today is reporting that the case was reopened for a clerical error. So a little bit of context on that part of the story. Now, when we look at Monique's life, She moves on. She marries this dentist, Spencer Tepe. The two marry in 2020. They have these two children who are now 1 and 4 years old. McKee, though, he goes on with his training to become a surgeon, leaves Virginia in 2020 after graduating from residency, does a fellowship, it's been reported, in Maryland. Eventually, he makes his way to Las Vegas. And this is where things get sketchy because he works for this surgical group. And it appears he had some professional issues in the months leading up to the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe. There's this lawsuit filed in 2024 accusing a physician's assistant at the surgical practice where McKee was working of inserting a catheter incorrectly before a 2023 procedure. And the catheter allegedly broke, and an 8.6-inch part of the catheter was left in a patient's body, according to the lawsuit. Now, McKee was named not because he did the procedure, but because the plaintiff argues McKee was responsible for training this PA on how to put the catheter in correctly, and they say he didn't. Now, it's not as much the lawsuit that is what is really sketchy for McKee. It's how it apparently he responded to the lawsuit and what it unearthed about what maybe he was telling his place of employment. So the company that's trying to serve him an amended complaint say that they tried 9 times to find Michael McKee last year, starting in September, about 3 months before these murders, and they couldn't do it. They went to his address multiple times. At one point, there was a TV that was on and then turned off, but nobody came to the door. And what made it even more concerning was this company goes to Michael McKee's employer, this surgical practice in Las Vegas, and a doctor there says they have no idea where he is. And they say he just disappeared. And then on top of that, they say that McKee's surgical license for Nevada expired in the middle of last year over the summer. Right now, he has an active surgeon's license in Illinois where he was living, but there's also one that was active in California. Now, to this point, looking at the path that Monique was on and McKee was on, and as much as it appears they went their separate ways, well, it seemed that way. But then, of course, everything changes on December 30th.
This individual, Spencer, works with me, and he did not show up to work this morning, and we cannot get a hold of him or his family.
He didn't show up to work?
Correct.
Okay. Did he have medical problems or?
No, and he's been reliable, and we cannot get in touch with him, his wife, his family, anybody that lives in that house.
Okay. So
There's
you're
2
in
kids
Florida.
in the home. I'm in Florida. I own the business. I was informed by my employees that he was not at work, and he runs the office.
Now, that's the first 911 call that came in from Dr. Spencer Tepe's work when he didn't show up. His boss called, who was actually on vacation in Florida, because coworkers were calling saying that Dr. Tepe, who loves going to work and is always reliable to be on time and be at the office, didn't show up. Now, as police were dispatching units and getting to the Tepe home to do a welfare check, and originally the first police officer sent to the house went to the wrong address, but a friend shows up at the Tepe's home concerned about their well-being, and that's the person who goes into the home and says that they found Spencer dead in a bedroom. Police say both the Tepes were found inside the house on the 2nd floor with multiple gunshot wounds.
There's a body. There's a body
inside?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me get you on the line with the medic, okay? Stay on the line.
Now, Michael McKee was arrested on January 10th in Rockford, Illinois. Police have yet to say what type of communication they had with McKee during the investigation that made them believe that he is the person responsible for killing Monique and Spencer Tepe. But in their news conference, the chief of police was incredibly confident that they have the right person. Now, initially, McKee was just charged with 2 counts of murder. Those charges were then upgraded to 2 counts of aggravated murder. Then on Friday, and this is where we get to this new information that we're talking about right now, McKee is indicted by a grand jury on 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. Here is the indictment that we have at Law&Crime. And you take a look here and you can see the counts for aggravated murder have a specification for the use of automatic weapon/silencer displayed or brandished firearm. More specifically, in the indictment, quote, it reads, the grand jurors further find and specify that Michael McKee had a firearm that was equipped with a firearm muffler or suppressor on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense. In plain terms, it appears prosecutors believe he had a silencer on the gun that he allegedly used to kill Monique and Spencer Tepe. Now, when it comes to that now fifth charge, the aggravated burglary charge he is now facing, the grand jury believed that there was enough evidence to prove that McKee trespassed into the home of the Tepes and either was in possession of a deadly weapon or attempted, threatened, or inflicted harm to another, which we know he allegedly did, both qualifying factors according to Ohio law. Now, we also know that police believe that they may have the murder weapon that was used. McKee lived in this luxury condo building in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, and these are images that his neighbor sent us of police in her building after McKee's arrest. There was an officer posted outside his 12th floor apartment for 24 hours a day as that investigation continued on. The Columbus police chief said that inside his apartment, they found multiple weapons, but they also say they found one that they believe they have a preliminary link to that is tied to the crime scene. Local media had reported before an arrest was made that some shell casings were found at the crime scene. So very, very critical evidence as they're building their case. Now, you also may remember this. This is the person of interest video, and it showed someone walking in the alleyway behind the Tepes home around the time that they were murdered, between 2 and 5 o'clock in the morning on December 30th. This person wearing all black, this person looking away from cameras, and they say that they believe that this person is Michael McKee, and it was, according to police, the video surveillance cameras that they asked the public for that was really key evidence in tracking that person of interest, someone who they wanted to talk to. They say that person of interest then went to a vehicle, and it was a vehicle that arrived shortly before Spencer and Monique were killed. And then the vehicle left shortly after, going to Illinois, and the vehicle was registered to Michael McKee. One thing that we don't know of at this point, even in the entry in that indictment that talks about the aggravated burglary charge that Michael McKee is now facing. How was he able to get into Spencer and Monique Tepe's home? That is still a major unanswered question at this point. Again, police have said there was no sign of forced entry into the home. McKee is currently in the county jail in Rockford awaiting extradition. He made his first court appearance last week. It was very brief, and he waived his right to an extradition hearing. So now it's really on Columbus police, who say that they're in the process of working out the logistics on getting McKee to Ohio if for whatever reason he's not back in Ohio by a week from Friday. So January 23rd, there is a status hearing that is scheduled in his case. Join us now to talk about this new development. Rich Schoenstein, trial attorney, thank you as always for being with us here on Law and Crime. What can we, because we see, and at this point we're still working on getting the indictment ourselves, but this 5-count indictment from what we can see on court records online, what do you read into that?
Well, it looks like an indictment for aggravated murder, which is the top charge. There are really 6 different possibilities under Ohio law. Aggravated is the top charge. It carries the top penalties and, in fact, carries the possibility of the death penalty, although I don't see any indication yet that they're seeking that. And it's usually based on premeditation, which, if you look at what we're hearing about this indictment, seems to be what the authorities think happened here.
And there's the other part, the specification on it is use of automatic firearm/silencer, displayed or brandished firearm. Does that mean that he used a silencer allegedly in these murders?
I'd sure like to see the actual indictment. I know you just said you're looking for it. That would maybe indicate it, but it does suggest potentially that a silencer was used, and that would be a huge factor in this case.
Yeah, and of course there's a lot of details we don't know, and then we're working still on, at the time we're recording this interview, of getting the indictment itself. Going from, he was originally facing 2 counts of murder, then that gets upgraded to 2 counts of aggravated murder. Of course, he's accused of killing 2 people in Spencer and Monique Tepe, but now he's facing 4 counts of aggravated murder. Why would that be?
I'm not sure, unless it's under different theories. You would expect 1 count per victim. There are 2 victims, so there were 2 counts the first time. But maybe if one is under a firearm specification and one is under some other theory, there could be multiple counts for the same victim. I've seen it laid out like that sometimes.
And he was indicted by a grand jury in Franklin County, Ohio, where Columbus is. I know there's that kind of cliche line that people can say, like the ham sandwich. You could indict a ham sandwich. But what really did prosecutors do to get to this point where he's been indicted? What does this mean for the case going forward?
Well, it's not totally easy to get an indictment. It is, the reason they talk about it that way is because you only hear from the prosecution in front of the grand jury. You don't hear from the defense. You don't get a defense. Witnesses don't get cross-examined. So it's pretty easy relative to proving someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. It's relatively easy to get an indictment. So the prosecution would have gone into that grand jury with whatever evidence they have. And if they have proof that this individual traveled from Illinois to Columbus, arrived at the home in the middle of the night, had a gun and or silencer, and then left and went back, and obviously there is proof that two individuals had been killed by gunshot, that's probably enough to get an indictment. If on top of that, you could show any kind of records, we don't know what authorities have in terms of evidence they might have unveiled about this individual's internet search history or his texts or his phone calls or what else was going on in his life. They could have added some of that to the picture too, but it sounds like more than enough to get an indictment here.
And I know we're still at the very beginning. I mean, he's still in Illinois at the time we're talking right now. He hasn't even come back to Ohio. We don't know how long this could go on until there even is a trial in something like this. But he's been indicted on these 5 counts. Does that mean, who knows what his cell phone history will find? Who knows what else, what other evidence could come forward? How could prosecutors even add more charges? Like, how does that process work of, if there's more evidence, you add more charges? Like, do you have to go in front of a grand jury, continue to go in front of a grand jury as you're building your case if you want to add more charges?
Generally speaking, if you were going to get additional charges as opposed to additional evidence, you would go back and get a superseding indictment if you had something else. Now, if it's just more evidence, right, he's been charged with aggravated murder. If it's just more evidence to prove that it reaches that level, they don't need to get a new indictment. They just have more evidence.
And for the police in Columbus, authorities in Columbus, they're still working out getting him back to Ohio from Illinois. How does being indicted by a grand jury impact, I guess, that part of it and maybe the urgency to get him to Ohio to face these charges?
Well, it should make it easier. And by the way, Chris, I think we've talked about this before. I grew up in Columbus, so that is really my hometown. Spent a few years there. And the fact that you have him indicted makes the extradition process a little bit easier. He may even waive extradition. I don't know if he has counsel yet. He might even waive it and just come to Columbus voluntarily, because fighting that is not going to be a winning proposition. Nobody avoids extradition on a murder charge in the United States of America. So sooner or later, he will be in Columbus to answer these charges.
And there's a long way to go when it comes to what his side of the story is, what a defense could look like. But whoever his defense attorney is, I know he did waive extradition last week, and now he's kind of just waiting for Columbus police to figure out their logistics to get him back to Columbus. He had a public defender at that hearing. As a vascular surgeon, I mean, I'm sure he financially did pretty well where he might not qualify for a public defender. Or maybe I'll ask about that. I mean, if he was someone who was making 6 figures, like, is that something where he would be forced to then hire a personal defense attorney as opposed to like having this public defender, which he did in Illinois for a very brief hearing?
Well, first of all, I forgot that detail that he waived extradition. Secondly, so often a defendant will get a publicly appointed defender right at the outset while they're still in the process of selecting someone to represent them. And especially where he's going to need a Columbus-based lawyer. I shouldn't say need. I mean, I guess he could do it with an out-of-state or some combination, but he should want a Columbus-based lawyer who knows the laws of Ohio, who knows the jury pool in Ohio, who knows the the prosecutors in Ohio in case he wants to make a deal. He should get somebody local if he can. I don't know. I do business litigation, as you know, and I never make any presumption about someone's wherewithal. There are plenty of people out there who have made a lot of dough and don't have money for one reason or another. And I understand this individual has some litigation against him, so that might be a factor. So I don't know what his financial situation is. He should be entitled to a public defender probably in any event.
Yeah, no, and fair point. I mean, certainly you would think as a vascular surgeon, but everybody's got different sort of financial situations. Ohio is a death penalty state. What is the bar? And I know he's facing aggravated murder charges, but what is the bar typically for someone to face the possibility of a death penalty in a case?
Well, I haven't studied the Ohio statute. Typically, there are aggravating factors. Use of a firearm could be an aggravating factor. Premeditation can be an aggravating factor. The silencer, if there is one, would come into play here. If he really drove from Illinois to Ohio with a gun and a silencer, went into a home and killed two people, and then drove back, that would probably be sufficient to allege some of the aggravating factors necessary for a death penalty, because that's a lot of premeditation. It's use of a deadly weapon. By the way, there were two children in the house.
Yeah.
So you could allege that he endangered other people, including children, in the commission of his crime. Also, he's charged, I think, with breaking and entering.
Yeah,
so
burglary.
You can allege that he committed murders while in the course of an additional felony. That is sometimes an aggravating factor. So I think there would be enough here to make out that charge if prosecutors want it. And sometimes prosecutors choose not to seek the death penalty, even if they can. It tremendously complicates the proceedings. It makes their job much harder to get a conviction. And there's a lot that plays into that. So I would just keep an eye on that part of the case for now.
For whoever his defense attorney is going to be, maybe it's a public defender, maybe he's able to get, a very expensive, very seasoned defense attorney, high profile, who knows how that's going to play out. That person walks in, they meet with him day one when he's back in Ohio. Like, what happens next when you're trying to figure out what a defense looks like when it does appear, and often these cases do, that the prosecution has some pretty damning evidence against him?
Well, I guess I want to get, first of all, in any kind of case like this, you want to get your arms around the competency of your client. You want to make sure there's no immediate issue about mental capacity or anything like that that comes into play. We see that has played out in California in the Nick Reiner case. You need to get your hands around that. And then you got to try to figure out, what is the defense? Is there a defense of, I'm not the person who did it? Or is there a defense of, I am the person who did it, but there's some other circumstance that needs to be taken into consideration? For example, insanity, self-defense, or some other mitigating factor. And then, of course, in a case like this, that's a potential capital case, you're really keeping your eye on the penalties. And your number one priority always in a potential capital case is keeping your client alive. And you might focus some of your attention to that more than the underlying merits.
And again, this is a question that we can't answer today, but you see some cases, very different situation, but it's like Idaho and Brian Kohberger, that went on for years until we got to the point where there was even going to be a trial. You look at other murder cases, sometimes they can be solved or not solved, but reach the end with a conviction or a verdict, within a year and a half. What is it that determines whether a case is going to be one that does last that long period of time, where we're here, 2028, 2029, still talking about whether Michael McKee committed these murders, or if it's one of those where we do see a pretty fast track to a verdict, which does happen in some cases?
Yeah, I think that the two things I would single out, and there are others, are complexity and strategy. So the complexity of the case is a factor for everybody involved, for the prosecution to get their arms around it, for the defense to look at all the evidence and figure out what the defense is going to be. So cases where you have multiple victims, especially cases with different victims at different times in different locations, which we've seen sometimes, or that happen over long periods of time, or that have a lot of different witnesses that need to be called, they can get very complex, and that can drag out a case. In terms of strategy, the defendant has a right to a speedy trial, but doesn't usually invoke it in a case like this because the defense needs time too. And the idea of a speedy trial is you put the prosecution to the test of going to trial right away because you think that's going to interfere with their ability to put on a case. But if it interferes with your ability to put on a defense case, you've absolutely backfired. So usually you don't see that in a case like this. It's early 2026, so my rough estimate would be a trial sometime 2027. And remember, of course, there's every possibility that this will end up with some kind of negotiated resolution. Lots of cases still end in a plea deal, and we don't know if that's going to be a possibility here.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next. He's still in Illinois at the time that we're recording this, but indicted by a grand jury in Ohio. Rich Schoenstein, trial attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Ohio native, thank you as always for taking the time to be with us.
Good to see you, and my heart goes out to the family here and the whole community. Really, really rough murder.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can watch episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.